Today we're getting under the hood of reproductive health with Kayla, an author and a college English instructor. When did you first realize something wasn't right, and how did your body try to tell you?
So I was young. I was 24, 25 years old, newlywed, just started my career, and we decided that we needed to start planning our family. And so we started trying to get pregnant. And at first, there was no reason to be alarmed because with infertility, you need to be unsuccessful for about 6 months to a year before seeking out professional help. So at first, I just was not too concerned, except month after month, the ovulating kid is showing I'm ovulating, but the pregnancy test is showing I'm not pregnant. And my body responded, I think, just going into this anxiety because then you start feeling anxious and it's hard to just kind of enjoy the process of trying to get pregnant. It became almost like a chore, and not just a chore, it almost seemed like a task that needed to be fulfilled in order to achieve this goal. And my body just responded through anxiety because I did but didn't want to take a pregnancy test, because it's almost like the moment I took the test I knew what the answer was going to be and I didn't want to recognize that answer.
How were your concerns received by the healthcare system, and did you feel heard?
So a friend of mine reached out to me because she had undergone some form of infertility herself. She had endometriosis, untreated endometriosis. She needed to undergo a DNC to clean out her uterus, and then she had a successful pregnancy. And she gave me her doctor, or the doctor's facility. My husband and we visited the doctor, and the initial visit was disheartening. I left quite dejected because I felt like we weren't being heard. We had this unexplained infertility, and on the surface, it felt like, well, you're just not trying hard enough. We weren't having conversations about a sperm sample. Like, we weren't checking off the list to see the source. It was more of, you're not trying hard enough. Try another 3 months and then come back, and then we'll start testing. So we went to, that was a gynecologist. I went to a regular general practitioner, and the general practitioner ordered the semen test. And so we were able to rule out my husband early on of his like sperm count and the shape of the sperm. So it obviously, at that point, it was something to do with me. And I think because of that dismissal, I feared seeking out more professional help because I felt like they were telling us we just weren't trying hard enough. And I mean, I was young, I was in my 20s. And so I just felt like, okay, well, if one doctor is saying that we're not trying hard enough, then what's the point of going to another doctor? Why am I going to waste this time and money for another doctor to tell me the exact same thing? And so, I mean, it did break a little bit of that trust with the medical community in terms of my reproductive health.
What was the most confusing or isolating part of your journey?
The confusing part was I I wished I advocated more for myself and for my family when it came to my fertility and my reproduction. And the isolating part of it was as far as like my intimate circle. So we're talking my grandparent, my grandmother, my mother, and even my mother-in-law and some of my closest friends. They didn't understand what I was going through. Like, it was hard for them to truly grasp the isolation that comes with infertility. Of They just didn't understand that when you're doing an ovulating kit and month after month you're taking a pregnancy test, of just how like damaging that is to your mental health. And they were supportive, and I think they were supportive as much as they could be, but I think it's difficult to be supportive when you truly don't understand what a person is going through. And I have a friend, when she tried to get pregnant the second time, it took her 3 to 4 months to get pregnant. And she finally, like, she approached me and she goes, "How did you go through this?" She goes, "I'm only going through this for 3, 4 months and I'm struggling to get pregnant." She goes, "You went through this for years." And she goes, "And I'm already losing my mind and I already want to give up." So when she went through just a small fraction of what I've gone through, there was just that little bit of understanding that surfaced. But I think it's something that it is isolating. It is isolating. And unfortunately, it's isolating just simply because people don't understand it unless you've been through it yourself. I feel like I'm the queen of masking. I will go to work with a smile on my face and I will act like nothing is going to happen. I journaled a lot. I can go back through my journals and look at like where I was in these intimate private moments of my life and just how broken I truly was, and just not just how broken I was, but how much I was hiding from people in that brokenness. And because I would go to work, I'm smiling and acting like nothing is bothering me when internally I was a mess.
How did your experience shape your relationship with your body?
At first, I felt I tied my entire identity to my womb. Like my entire who I was as a person, who I was as a woman was tied to my reproductive capabilities. And I felt like my body was defective and I was not fulfilling my role as a woman. So I felt like I had no control. And the one way I could regain control was through my eating habits and my exercising habits, which probably wasn't the healthiest choice. I'm an emotional non-eater. So generally when I'm under tremendous amount of stress and anxiety, even if I'm masking, my body still physically responds, and sometimes it's going to physically respond and that I'm just not hungry. And that has been my body's response to trauma. And sometimes like my close friends and family will pick up on it. They will tell me, "Well, why don't you eat them?" "I'm not hungry." And they'll try to force me to eat, and I don't want to eat. And I think when you are going through depression and you're going through, like, you lose your appetite altogether. And I have friends who are the exact opposite. They're emotional eaters. And so I feel like so much of our diet is tied to where we are emotionally, which is why I don't believe in judging any woman by her size, because you don't know what's going on emotionally in her body. So, so yeah, I try to control as much as I could. And now that I'm 39, I'm getting close to 40. I can take a step back and look and say, "Listen, you have been through so much." And I have such a deeper appreciation for my body now and realize that I am not a failure. I'm so much more than my uterus. So much more. There's a whole person in there, and my infertility and my miscarriage doesn't mean I have failed as a human being. And that's a message I want to give to my daughters, because when they are going through adulthood, I don't want them to feel like their value in society is tied to their reproduction or their reproductive organs.
What role did uncertainty play, and how did you cope with not having clear answers?
Oh, I don't think I coped well. I think, like I said, I mask and I mask a lot. After my miscarriage, almost a year later, I had a coworker approach me and said, "We didn't know how to approach you because you act like nothing happened." And I'm writing in my journals of just despair and taking a shower and crying in the shower so nobody can see me cry. I just felt like it in my mind at the time, because again, when you're going through depression and you're like gaslighting yourself into thinking you're just an unsuccessful person because your body is not reacting the way you want to. I don't know. I just, at the time, I felt like I had to hide everything. I had to hide my tears. I had to hide my emotions. I had to just mask everything, because apparently that's what I thought was being a strong woman. And that's not what being a strong woman is. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to express your frustrations and your anger. And I would say my top emotion at that time, especially on how I was handling the uncertainty, it was anger. It's almost like this grief process. I don't think people talk much in the infertility about it's a grieving process. You're losing something and you're losing the could have been, the would have been. You have this romantic idea of what your children would look like, and you probably have your names picked out in your nurseries. And when it's not happening or it's uncertain if it's going to happen, it's almost you're grieving that whole process of that would have been. And I definitely went through that of just anger. I was angry at women who could get pregnant and even women who were great mothers. But I was also angry at mothers who or women who were pregnant, and I'm hearing stories at the hospital, their kids are being taken away that day. And they have their own story. I'm, past that, but you do kind of go through this like, well, I want that baby. I want a baby. DFS when it become or Child Protective Service when it be coming in and taking my baby away, and you just start comparing. You become this angry person, and I didn't want to be angry anymore. And through my grieving process, before I got pregnant with my first daughter, actually, I had surrendered. I had entered this acceptance phase of I just accepted not ever physically carrying a child. I was a teacher. I used my students were some I was a mother figure to a lot of my students. I thought about adopting. And so I just felt like I had surrendered and accepted this idea that I was no longer going to carry a child. And I had to be okay with that in that grieving process.
Were there moments of dismissal or delay, and how did that impact your path forward?
Like I said, my original doctor's appointment when I felt like something was wrong was dismissive. It was, we're not trying hard enough. And what we realized with my first pregnancy was I had a progesterone issue. And so my inability to get pregnant was tied to um, my hormones. My hormones were not functioning correctly. And as a woman, it's so difficult to, I think, pinpoint that you're having a hormonal issue without actually doing probably blood work every single day because our hormones fluctuate so much. But I had to go on progesterone for the first trimester. And even then, I felt like my whole pregnancy was dismissed. I tried 3 years to get pregnant. Here I am. I had just surrendered to the fact of not getting pregnant at all. And then I get pregnant. And I was so excited to go to the doctor. And I know like the rule of thumb is to wait until after your first trimester to announce it. I just could not wait. I knew so many people were going to be happy. They knew our story. I had the blood work. Blood work comes back. I get a call from the doctor. And it's like, we have issues. And it was my HCG levels were too high. So they thought maybe I was pregnant with multiples. And I'm like, oh, wow. I go from wanting a baby to having babies. But then they were more concerned about progesterone. And I think they want you at like a 9 or above. I was at a 7. So I was just slightly below the recommended level of progesterone. So I have an ultrasound. It's like the size of like a piece of rice or and didn't hear the heartbeat, but there was no reason to be alarmed. The doctor said I needed another ultrasound in 2 days. And if we didn't see growth or hear a heartbeat, then we needed to make a decision on what I wanted to do, which was alluding to probably a DNC abortion or something because it was going to, the baby was going to survive. So in my moment, in my mind, it was almost like I'm being dismissed again of finally pregnant. Now you're telling me I need to make a decision on what I wanted to do with my pregnancy. Had the ultrasound. There is growth. We hear a faint thump, thump, and this is early pregnancy, roughly 5 weeks in. And I'm put on progesterone immediately. And even then, I felt like the doctor was dismissive toward this pregnancy. And I was getting ready to travel overseas. And basically, she goes, here, take the progesterone. You don't want to be bleeding in another country. And I come back from traveling, and my first trimester ended, and I was labeled a regular pregnant woman, and I could go off my progesterone. So I just felt like the joy of being pregnant with all three of my pregnancies was just robbed.
How did this experience affect your identity as a woman, partner, or potential mother?
As a woman, I think I brought it up. I felt like a failure, but it's part of my story. And as a story, I realized there's so much more to being a woman than just your uterus and your womb and what your body biologically can do. There's a human being in there. I think as a partner, I I will be candid. I struggled. I struggled so much because I when infertility arises, I feel like the attention is so much on the mother and not so much on the father. So a little bit of me was a tad bit jealous of my husband because when he went out into public, he was able to be a man and a friend and be who he always is. But when I was going into public, it just seemed like there was this entitlement to talk about my uterus and when I'm getting pregnant. And I just didn't even want to go out in public anymore because, and there was that tad bit jealousy. I don't know if any other couples had gone through that where it was definitely the attention is on the woman and not so much on the man. It's definitely not equal. And I had to get over that because, yes, at the end of the day, I was having hormonal issues. I did have a blockage in a fallopian tube. It was my body that we were having as to why we were struggling to get pregnant. And I think I had to forgive myself. And all of these were not out of my control. I mean, they were. And I had to accept that this was completely out of my control. And as a mother, it has made me more open with my daughters. I had the period talk with my 11-year-old when she was 8 to prepare her. We have open dialogue. She'll ask questions. Sometimes she feels like she's getting close to starting, but the fact that she feels comfortable enough to come to me and say, hey, my body's doing this. And she asked me, is it going to hurt? And I would tell her there's some discomfort, but if you're in a tremendous amount of pain, you need to let me know so we can go to the doctor and check it out. Because later on, when it comes to my daughters and when they are adult women, and if they want to make a decision to become mothers, I want it to be their decision and their decision alone. And I don't want their decision to not have children be tied to something I could have done in their early reproductive years. So if they're in a tremendous amount of pain, we're seeing early signs of endometriosis from 13 to 19 or 20, I want to know that I can be proactive in that. So when they are in their 20s and 30s and they tell me I don't want to be a mom, that is their decision. Nothing is preventing them from that. They're making that decision. So as a mom, it's just made me more supportive and more open about my daughter's bodies.
What conversations were hardest to have with doctors, your loved ones, or even yourself?
I think with doctors, and it's interesting because I have like written a whole book about reproduction. I think just having an open conversation about your sex life was just so invasive. Like I honestly felt like that was the most uncomfortable conversation I could have had was so and like the frequency and it just like I didn't want to have this conversation and because like I said it turned into like a chore and a checklist and that's not what intimacy should be about and trying to bring a child into this. And I had interviewed women who have done IVF and said that the whole process is so clinical and cold. And I feel like when you're going through infertility and the joy of making the baby becomes kind of clinical and kind of cold in itself. And I think that was a difficult conversation of how do you maintain intimacy when there's so much stress attached to it? And that was a difficult conversation to have. With others, I masked and I masked so much and I feel like through the masking it was just difficult for me to start standing up for myself. And I remember the last Mother's Day before I found out I was pregnant. I had like this woman approach me. We were attending church and she goes, if you just keep praying, I know you'll become a mother. And I just didn't like that phrase because then I think you're tying reproduction to maybe sin of like maybe if you just keep believing and sometimes faith can help you through a hard time, but I just think it's like two completely separate issues and they should not be tied together. Unless you're going to say, I'm going to pray for you for an answer, but I don't think you should say, just keep believing and it will happen someday. And I responded to the woman like, well, I'm already a mother. And she goes, oh, you're pregnant. And I remember telling her, I said, no, but I'm a teacher and I have some students that need a mother figure. And that's how I responded and that's how I viewed myself. So that's how I started having those conversations with people, and that they're like, when they start approaching me and constantly asking me these questions about when I was getting pregnant, I finally just had to grow enough confidence to have a conversation of, this is inappropriate, please stop. The way I view myself and how I view myself as a mother may be different from you, but I am still a mother to someone. And to myself, I had to accept that I could possibly never get pregnant, and I had to be okay with that. And what does a life look like when you're not being pregnant, and how am I going to use that life?
What kind of support made the biggest difference and what was missing?
I have always journaled, even since I was a little girl. Journaling made a lot of difference because when you're going through something traumatic and something just heart wrenching, it's difficult to talk about it, and not everybody's going to understand, and even you may not even understand, and you may have floods of anger and you don't even know where this anger is coming from. I can go back and look at my journals, and on certain days I'm like, oh, I was very angry that day, and not understanding like maybe the root of the anger. So journaling was definitely something that I appreciated. Going on hikes. I live in a scenic area of Missouri, and one of my favorite places is Roaring River State Park. And I would just go on hikes, and I felt like just pushing myself. Maybe I can walk this hike and improve my time from the next time. I think just this idea of just escaping, because on this specific hike and in this state park, there is no cell phone service. And I loved that. I loved just knowing I was disconnected from everything and I could just be with nature and I can just have a moment to breathe. So just having access to hiking and journaling was quite helpful. Having friends, and even having like my faith a little bit. I have issues with religion, but I don't have issues with faith, if that makes any sense, of having something to hold on to. What I wished we just had more support for women. I felt going into my adulthood as a woman, I was so ill equipped and undereducated about my body. And if I had known more resources that I could go get a second opinion about more knowledge about my body, I felt like I could probably not have been so toxic to myself.
Looking back, Kayla, what do you wish you had known earlier?
Patience and grace. Give yourself patience and grace. Don't hit the pause button on your life because you're not getting pregnant month after month. You need to keep living. You do. Book a trip, go have coffee with your girlfriends, go on the hike. Don't put your life on pause because you're not getting the outcome you want.
How has your experience changed the way you advocate for yourself and for other women?
I now understand I have a voice. I have rights. I can get a second opinion. I can respectfully disagree with the medical professional. I can. And I can go get another opinion. I'm not just restricted to a specific provider. I Through this, a lot of the knowledge I gained about my body was myself. I was doing my own research, and I it just made me realize, how can we make these resources available for women? Because I don't think I'm alone. I think a lot of women are probably in my same boat of, I just don't understand my body sometimes, and or I didn't really understand ovulation. I didn't understand the role hormones played because I wasn't educated on that. As embarrassing as that sounds, because I'm a very well educated woman. I am. I've been to university for several years. And but I didn't have a sex education class, or not a good one, when I was a freshman in high school. It was more abstinence only, don't have sex if you don't want to end up as a teen mom, or STDs. And that was about the gist of it. There wasn't this conversation about ovulation and this idea of actual reproduction. And I think that being able to have real, raw, honest conversations, even with our teenagers, could help a lot. I'm a big advocate for comprehensive sex education across the board. And when it comes to advocating for women, I have my book. I'm working on my doctorate in healthcare for a narrative medicine certificate. And my goal is providing the resources for women to see themselves as survivors, as storytellers of their own bodies, and to find networks to where women can have the resources to connection is what I'm wanting. I really want women to feel connected because they are not was probably true.
Top three tips you'd like to share with women going through this journey?
Be patient. Um, yeah, just be patient. I think when we're trying to rush the outcome, it just adds more toxicity to it. You are on your own timeline. I felt like society put me on a timeline. You are not on society's timeline. You are on your own timeline. So be patient and just um, trust the process. And like I said, do not give up living because you're not getting the outcome you want. Go live life and be patient throughout the process. Get a second opinion. If you are feeling dismissed from your first practitioner, I'm from a rural area. So if you're from a rural area, I understand that you feel like you have a finite amount of options. You may have to drive, but go get a second opinion, and it's worth your time, especially if you don't agree with the type of treatment that you are that a doctor or a provider is prescribing to you. And network. I felt like I was one of the rare women in Southwest Missouri who has gone through miscarriages and infertility. And when I started coming forward, I realized more women in my circle has had miscarriages than not. And we started comparing stories and networking. And sometimes networking gets you access to the doctor that is going to be the perfect doctor for you. So don't isolate yourself from people.